I'll be handing back some your briefings and making some comments, extensive comments on the briefings. As you know, second briefings are due next week, and we're going to follow a single blind protocol. I will talk about that as soon as everybody gets in here, so that fewer people miss it over there. Homework 1, homework 3 is obviously due. That's congratulations. That's the last year homeworks. You will see questions that are similar on the final. We will put up the answer key as soon as we check it, because we haven't done that yet. I will have office hours today, 12:30 after class, and I'll talk. I'm not sure about the whole extra credit thing. I put that in an email to you guys. I've got some interesting suggestions. Most of them involve work by me, which is not what I want. So I'm not sure about how to handle extra credit right now. There is some notion of maybe, getting an op-ed published. That's a good thing. Going to the city council and making a presentation. That's a good thing. That doesn't involve work on my part. So obviously that sounds like a lot of work, but people that want extra credit should be considering that it's a lot of work that they're going to be doing. So continue to give me good ideas about extra credit if you feel like you want to help your fellow students, or you personally want extra credit. I don't just give it out like candy, right? If I could sell it, that would be nice and efficient, but we're not that efficient. Any open questions from anybody? Stuff on their mind? Yeah?
When is briefing 2 or the peer grading due?
The peer grading on briefing 2 will be due a week from the hand-in. So you're going to hand in your briefing 2 next Tuesday, and it'll be due on the last day of class, on Tuesday the 8th.
Oh, so you still class on the 8th?
We still have class on the 8th. Okay? There is no new material in the class on the 8th. I'll be talking about the stuff that you guys do in discussion section, right? The week of just December 1st. There is no discussion section this week. You already know that. There are discussion sections next week after Thanksgiving. And you're going to be doing some more games in discussion section. I believe there are points on the table in terms of course grades, so you might want to show up to the discussion section, and if you do well, then you'll get some points added to your course grade. All right? Other questions? All right, let me wrap up some more stuff on benefit cost analysis. Last week I mentioned, this is a little bit of review stuff, right? But we want to keep stuff in current dollars. That's why we have this whole thing called a discount rate, right? And we had the discussion about a financial discount rate and a social discount rate. I just made up those letters there. That is not industry-wide jargon, but you know what I mean by financial versus social. We want to make sure they're in current dollars, okay? And then, or net present value for people that have heard that before. Secondly, there's a huge difference between willingness to pay versus willingness to accept. And there's that notion of cheap talk. Benefit cost analysis turns out to be super important in policy work. And it's also very political, and it's also very manipulated. And I will get a little bit more into the manipulation of benefit cost analysis with respect to things like building dams when I get to number 5, my good ideas. Okay, value of statistical life. Who remembers what that is? More or less, ballpark figure. What's a life worth?
7 million?
Huh?
Is it 7 million?
7 million, yeah, more or less. Value of statistical life. This goes in benefit cost analysis. Approximately your life is worth $7 million. If you're a valuable American, if you're an Indian, obviously it's less, according to Americans. And we'll get into that dodgy little question when we get to climate change. Yeah.
Is the value, the statistical value of a life for some people, let's say you are a neuroscientist who has years of education put into him and he's doing lots of good work, is that higher than for...
Are you being sexist by saying sexist?
No.
So that's a good question. So there's actually, let's take a little excursion on BSL for a second. First of all, I don't know if I actually told you how it's calculated. Did I tell you that, how it's calculated? Right. So what they do basically is they look and these scientists, these statisticians really, what they do is they look at someone and they go at a kind of a risk-reward axis here. So let's call this reward, as in your salary, okay? And let's put this as risk, as in the likelihood that you could die, okay? And if you are, for example, a postdoc teaching at Berkeley, then you're going to get a salary that's here and a risk of dying that's here. Okay? Now, if you're a professor who's at Berkeley, then you're going to have a salary that's here and a risk that's even less, because you don't talk to students. That's a joke. Bad joke. Okay. Anyway, so what they do is, so you get these office workers types of stuff, very low risk. But then you start getting into, well, what about if we have a coal miner, right, who's out there, has the risk of death because their coal mine might collapse. And they might be making postdoc salary, but the same person in terms of human capital, you guys have heard that before? You're here for human capital, education, right? So that very same person, this is the key. It's not that you have a postdoc or professor, but this same person might be able to take a lower paid, less risky job working at the video store, right? Renting stuff, right? You have a high school education, you can shovel coal, or you can rent movies, right? So there's this kind of trade-off here between essentially risk and reward. And if you look at enough professions, you get, any profession where you have, if you work in a machine shop, or you work as an airline pilot, or you work as, actually the military I think gets excluded because the risk of death is part of an occupational, it's a different kind of occupational hazard. But they look at the trade-off between these two things, and they basically say, well, how much are people willing to trade money for death? Voluntarily, in a market, right? So this doesn't work in totalitarian societies. Does not work with the Gulag, with the slave camps. But it does work with free market societies where people with a certain level of human capital are able to take a job with a certain trade-off between risk and reward. And when you are calculating this, you basically can find out if this is the risk of death, and then you just take that line out to 100% chance of dying, I guess. Right? And then you get a number, which is equivalent to a professor's salary. No, which is equivalent to $7 million. Something like that. That's how they figure out this VSL.
Okay, but if I value the death that is more or less certain, or that the risk goes up.
Given that line, yeah.
Given that line, and I arrive at $7 million, then wouldn't that logically mean that I could go to somebody and say, if you give me $7 million, you can shoot me on the spot? Doesn't that?
You can't spend the money. It sucks. No, but there's so this is in a sense it's because it's not how much you're willing to be paid to die in a direct please shoot me, right? But you're taking that risk. So statistically speaking, you are taking a high. It's taking statistics and kind of stretching the definition, right? So statistically, look at it this way: if you have a 1 in 100, say that your current job, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying, and you're willing to take a different job for a higher pay that has 1 in 100 chance of dying. Now, you personally go to work every day. You're not thinking, I'm going to die today, right? But there is going to be a higher salary attached to that, at least in your mind, right? And in the market, right? In terms of wages. So in that sense, it's, if you want, let's call it equilibrium, right? You're willing to take that kind of chance, but you're not necessarily, but it's just being paid enough that you have a statistical chance of dying, not that you're going to be dead for sure.
And so why do they take the 7 million and not half of that? Why do they take the highest possible value, not the average? Because
oh no, but this is kind of an average, right? If you actually did this for a professor and say, how much would you be willing to pay to take a deadly professor job? Then it would be like 700 million, because I'm so valuable.
So that's for everybody.
In a sense, yeah. These are calculated against blue collar jobs usually. Blue collar meaning you touch things that are dangerous, not paper. Like paper cut death, right?
So is it like the Department of Labor that calculates this?
It's the EPA has the number because the EPA uses it for environmental damages and the risk of dying. from toxic exposures and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, it could be the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It could be somebody. I mean, somebody does it. In fact, there's arguments over whose BSL is better, right? And every country will have their own statistical division doing this kind of calculation. The U.S. number tends to be 7 million, right? So, and then you have also, as part of this whole calculation, is dailies. D-A-L-Y. Does everyone remember what that? Who knows what that stands for? I can't remember the definition right now. It's and maybe I'm using the wrong acronym, but the idea is how many more years of life do you have to live? If you die of this thing, how many years of life do you lose? Okay, and this comes into the debate about AIDS versus cancer. Because your average cancer death occurs at, let's just say, 65. And your average AIDS death, let's just say, occurs at 35. Right? Are those the same deaths from a statistical, from a social perspective? No. If you have, let's just say you have an average life expectancy of 85, if you make it to 35, 85 is in the ballpark, right? So basically you are losing 50 years versus losing 20 years. And this is what people pay attention to, right? In terms of, if you have a certain limited budget in terms of your public health budget, and you need to figure out where to spend the money, do you want to spend it on curing AIDS or curing cancer? Right? It's the same concept as triage in the operations room of a battlefield hospital. When you come in off the battlefield and you lost a leg and the other guy lost his head, the doctor's like, the head guy is dead. I'm going to go work on the leg guy. Right? Or leg guy versus stomach injury. Stomach injury, well, whatever. The leg guy, I should make sure he doesn't bleed to death. Right? When you have a doctor in the battlefield making triage decisions, that's literally saying that person is going to die for sure. That person might die. That one I should probably save. If I don't, they'll die. Okay, and they literally decide life and death. Right? That's what triage really means. This is a form of public health triage, which is where do we put our budget? Right? Should we put it into cancer research, where we might save 20 years of every life of somebody who we cure from cancer, or AIDS, where we save 50 years of life? That's only on the benefit side. Right? Remember the cost side. Condoms, right, compared to crazy cancer treatments. Cancer treatment is extremely expensive, and it only gives you 20 years. Condoms or whatever, abstinence only according to some people, is worth 50 years. Right? So the cost-benefit on AIDS health prevention is insanely high compared to cancer work. And that, in some ways, is one of the reasons why a whole bunch of money has been pushed at AIDS, except there's the whole PR political pressure thing from the AIDS groups that started in the 80s, ACT UP in San Francisco, right? And then cancer groups come in and you have all these banded bracelets and stuff like that, right? So all of these, this number is this kind of debate over, and I don't know if the word is daily or not, this kind of debate of what a life is worth goes into the public policy debate on where we should put our money. If you're an individual, or even if you're Bill Gates, no, that's not right. Think of, there's a couple celebrities out there who have autistic kids, and they've been really pushing for the debate between vaccination and autism. Has anybody heard of that? Like, if you vaccinate my kid, or they'll get autism. And there's a huge argument in public health people, because they're basically saying, it's correlation, not causation, right? Let's just put that aside for a second. We do know that when you have a celebrity spokesperson for your particular affliction, right, you're going to get publicity and money, if it's not even the celebrity's money, right? So that, the whole back and forth of PR, of advertising essentially, is how money also gets allocated, right? If Angelina Jolie shows up at the U.S. Senate and says, Senator, sits on the guy's lap and says, I need some money for saving people, that budget appropriation is showing up, right? That's how she persuades, right? The other girl, the spicy girl. She's the UN ambassador for something, for public health or something like that. She's out there visiting ministers, and she's like, I'm a spice girl, you know, pay attention to me. And they do. Whatever, you know. See what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Do you see that ever in the media, that pattern? Hi, I'm an anonymous person on the street. I want you to give money for whatever. That doesn't happen, right? It's celebrities that push these things. The same way that celebrities get involved with war and war debates and stuff like that. So the thing is, there's some science going on in terms of this public health thing. It's also getting pushed back and forth by politics and celebrity and stuff like that. So that's what is all the other stuff that's going into benefit cost analysis, which is basically benefit cost analysis is if your benefit over your cost is, which one? Do I want greater or less than 1? Greater than 1, right? Then it's a good idea, right? But what if I have a benefit cost? I've got a benefit cost of project 1 is equal to 1.5, and I've got benefit cost of project 2 is equal to 2.5. Which one should I do? Okay, but then Tom Cruise says, no, this is important. And guess what happens? That will get done more often than not. Okay? And this matters, not more often than not, but quite more often than you want, let's say it this way. This matters because there's a limited budget for expenditure. So this project will get done, and this project will not. But you guys, you're doing your analysis, if you're actually using the economics, you want to be able to say, this is what we should be doing. Celebrities are not. Okay? Now, celebrities, Tom Cruise can come in and say, yo, Tom, if you fund half of this cost, then we can get the BC up to 2.5, and then everybody's happy. But Tom is going to be saying, he's like, oh, no, sorry, I have to take my money elsewhere. Right? So there's a notion of cheap talk from people that are pushing their own pet projects. Cheap talk in the sense of, are you putting your money where your mouth is? Or are you just sitting there, you're willing to do a PSA, but you're not willing to put $5 million down?
Is that an E or a C?
Where? This?
Yeah.
This is a C. Benefit over cost. Willingness to pay. Right? How much are you willing to pay me so I don't kill the whale? Yeah? Or how much are you willing to accept if I get to kill the whale? How much do I pay you to kill the whale? Right? So these numbers are different. Which one is bigger when you ask people these two numbers? Willingness to accept. People are always saying, oh, you want to kill the whale? $1 million. Right? How much am I willing to pay to save the whale? Oh, I have like 20 bucks. Right? That's what happens. Okay? Now, one other thing about benefit cost analysis. Notice numbers, numbers, numbers. Okay? Most people are like, wait, you can't put a value on a life, right? You can't put a value on a sunset. You can't put a value on a clean environment, our children's future. Or you can't put a value on how nice it feels to have whatever, to recycle, right? So there's a quantified, which is the dollar stuff, versus qualified. That's even the right word. So you have quantified costs or benefits versus qualified costs and benefits, right? It's stuff that you have a notion that it is good, but it's a subjective value. This is more subjective, and this is more objective. And you do want to include subjective costs and benefits in your analysis. If you're doing an analysis, you're going to sit there and you're going to do the benefit and a cost, and you're going to have $1 and a minus $1 and $1 and or a life. So remember the baby seat thing? You'll save the baby seats on airplanes. You'll save one baby life by putting the seat on the airplane, and you lose 1.5 baby lives because people who do not take the airplane take the car and then die in the car accident, and their babies die, right? Someone did that analysis. It's like, holy cow, this is actually really a bad idea. So you have 1 life versus 1.5 lives. You understand you can quantify those. But what if you have this versus that? What the hell does that mean? Right? You have to include it, though, in your analysis, at least so that you put it on the table. And you can even let people, if you're doing decision making and you're trying to get a decision maker to make a decision, say, look, You have to figure out what the value of a sunset is, or a happy voter, or whatever. You assign your own subjective values to this, and you give them the spreadsheet and say, you can play with the numbers, right? But if the subjective value of happiness is, or a happy voter is $200, and that's way higher than you really think, in order to flip over the benefit cost. Does that make sense what I'm talking about? They have a spreadsheet. Let's say it this way. Let's say that the benefit is 10 and the cost is 10. Okay? And then, so they're even. They're not sure if they should do the project, the decision maker. Okay? And then there's this kind of loose thing going on here. What the hell is this? Okay? And the politician says, that's worth about $10 to me, but the cost of is $15, right? Then that politician is assigning his own subjective values on these columns here, and that flips the benefit cost against the project. Do you see? And that is what happens, but at least you're making it more explicit what information is being used to make the decision. The fact that there's subjective value being put in, there's nothing you can do about that. People are just like that. If you sit there and say, a church versus a mosque, you're going to have completely different opinions about what should go here. Right? And your decision, your work as an analyst is not to assign values on that. Yeah.
What about situations where on the benefit side, the benefit is made up of, for example, let's say a bridge. We're building a bridge, so there's a cost associated with that, that's the taxpayer's cost. And then there's one construction company, and they get a huge chunk of benefit out of it. And then everybody else gets a little bit of benefit out of it.
Do you mean the cost? They get the contract from building the bridge.
Right, so they get, well, for them it's a benefit though, right?
No, but if you're the decision maker, you're only looking at the cost of construction. Who cares where that money goes? That's the cost to society versus the benefit to society.
So you don't take individuals benefiting from that into your...
Well, if it's a cost to society that goes to a benefit to an individual, then you just keep that clear, right? When you're doing benefit cost analysis, spending money on a bridge does not become a benefit for society.
Right, it doesn't become a benefit for society. Maybe driving across that bridge is the benefit for
That's
society.
Right, yeah.
But that one construction company does not go into the benefit analysis.
Not unless they enjoy driving across bridges.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Don't New Deal programs, didn't those kind of depend on the cost actually being a benefit to society because you give people jobs?
Right. So the other thing is that what you're talking about before is like just a transfer of wealth. Right? If you give me $10, society's not better off. Right? But if you're doing a cost benefit, you're looking at a project. Should we do this project? Right? Given I have a limited budget. When you talk about the New Deal, it was essentially, and what people are talking about right now is stimulus. Right? Let's spend $800 billion to make everybody, we'll borrow it from ourselves. We'll spend it and make ourselves better off by building bridges and stuff like that. So, there was some notion of we should spend our own money to put ourselves to work so that we feel good, so that we can have enough happiness to pay back our own money. Some kind of, it's like lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps. But that was based on the whole idea of needing to stimulate aggregate demand. I mean, that's a whole Keynesian debate that I don't know what to tell you. The stimulus, from a public policy perspective, the benefit cost and the stimulus has turned out to be tragically small. I mean, the benefit. If you've seen I've been putting some numbers on my blog, $700,000 per job, right? Which, I mean, dude, I'll work for $700,000, right? I'll dig holes, right? But the problem is even worse. They've actually been the jobs have been made up, a lot of them. This guy sold 5 pairs of boots to workers, construction workers. And he was given credit for creating 5 jobs. Right? And there's a lot of really bad examples. And the 9th Congressional District in Arizona, they received $750,000 of stimulus money, but there is no 9th Congressional District in Arizona. It doesn't exist. Right? And someone was pointing out saying, well, I found this on the website about government transparency, but that's the point. Government transparency is that you do see that there is no Congressional District. Because in the old days, you just start sending out money and someone said, yeah, I'm from the 9th Congressional District. And someone's like, sure, go ahead, take it. There's a lot of you guys, right? So $700,000, that's a lot of money to steal if it was stolen. But it got caught in a way. So the whole stimulus money thing is kind of like hocus pocus stuff, as far as I'm concerned. Different, long debate. Let's not have that right now. Did you have a question still? No? Okay. Any other questions on BCA stuff? I'm going to go to the next topic. Yeah? Okay. Climate change. Oh, yeah, talk about not controversial. Let me say just a few things. The Copenhagen Summit is happening in the near future in this place called Denmark, which is one of the super green places in the world. I think one of the highest rates of bicycle riding in the world. Lowest, and their car ownership, the car tax, I think it's like a 200% tax on purchasing a car. So if you buy a new car, instead of paying $20,000 here, you pay like $60,000 in Denmark. For some reason, they don't buy a lot of cars. Now, they're going there as a notion of updating on Kyoto. I don't know very much, but the whole idea is that we need a worldwide agreement on what to do about climate change, which is pretty damn hard, right? It's a big collective action problem. That's the stuff you guys have been thinking about and talking about and all that stuff. So, that's just happening. That's a thing that you guys should watch in the news. It'll happen, I think, in the next... Does anybody know the date? Like December
7th.
Something. What?
It's like the 7th to the 12th.
7th to the 12th. My prediction is they will have a communique come out after it where everybody is very worried about climate change and they all promise to do something and we'll see you in 5 years. So nothing will happen. The U.S., of course, from a political perspective, has not gotten anything together in terms of action on climate change. They might be forgiven. If Obama gives a nice speech, that'll be good. And the big deal, though, is that in a collective action problem, if you're going to cooperate in a public goods game, the people that you're playing with, you want them to show up and play fair. You don't want them to defect, right? From a policy perspective, the U.S. has been defecting from climate change negotiations ever since Kyoto happened, right? We're not going to do it. You guys go ahead, take care of the planet. We don't need it. We want to drive our SUVs around. So that has been a huge impediment. Europeans, of course, have set up their own carbon trading and cap and trade. It's kind of had a little bit of bumps in the road, but it's way more than we've got. We're still debating cap and trade, right? Let alone all of the disasters on that, which I'll get to in a second. U.S. disasters on cap and trade. So if the U.S. shows up, makes the right noises, that could help in terms of pushing along global negotiations over climate change. As I mentioned earlier in the class, it is the world's biggest collective action problem. It could be the end of the world collective action problem. As far as we're concerned, as everybody knows, the Earth will continue whether or not we are here. The big two players are the so-called G2, China and the U.S. The U.S., of course, is historically the biggest emitter of pollution in the world. China, I think if they haven't passed the U.S., they will pass the U.S. quite soon. Obviously, on a per capita basis, China is only at 1/4 of the U.S. emissions, but they want to have an American lifestyle, right? So that means big cars, big houses, lots of plastic. Actually, the Chinese like plastic more than us, as far as I know. I love going to China. You get a bottle of water. It's not just a bottle of water. It's a bottle of water in a plastic bag with a plastic straw. And then you tear out the bag, throw that away. Tear out the bag around the straw, throw that away. Put the straw in the plastic bottle, drink the liter of water, and then throw that away. So there is something, but that's like kind of a conspicuous consumption, right? I have enough money now. If you go to poor places in the world, the poorest places in the world have no garbage at all. Everything, it's not just that they only deal with natural materials. Everything gets used until it disintegrates, right? A glass bottle, plastic bottle, a t-shirt. You see people that are wearing t-shirts, the holes are bigger than the shirt, right? But they will wear that stuff, right? Very poor people do not throw anything away. When they get wealthy enough to start throwing stuff away, they do. They like it. I went to Albania in the 90s. They just got out from one of the worst dictatorships in world history. They loved littering. It was so great. They were free. In the old days, they go to jail for dropping stuff on the ground. And that was their kind of freedom. They just throw crap on the ground. So there's a bit of a problem there in terms of us, the Americans, let's say, going around and saying, no, you guys can't pollute, you can't have carbon, you can't throw plastic on the ground because it's bad. And they're like, whoa, we have to enjoy ourselves. You guys just did it for 50 or 100 years. So that's actually, there's a push and a shove back and forth, right? The Americans wrecked the world. The Europeans did a little bit, but the Americans wrecked the world, and now we're saying to everybody else, no, you shouldn't do it. We ruined it for you. You should be virtuous now, right? So there are these moral arguments. The Indians and the Chinese agree on this stuff. You get your whole line of developing countries. So what's going to end up happening, of course, is who's going to pay for it, right? Climate change is not going to be free. The first thing you have to consider is that everybody, and this is I don't know why this is such an open secret, but everybody has to use less. Our lifestyles, Americans especially, are going to have to go to a lower consumption. Full stop. Not bamboo pants and organic sushi. No sushi. Right? Only 4 pairs of pants, not 12 pairs of pants. That's the kind of stuff that everybody's like, oh my God, I can't handle that. And they don't want to handle it. Right? So, number one, top-line consumption is going to have to fall if any of this stuff is really going to happen in terms of climate change. And number two, someone's going to have to pay to either clean up existing technology, develop new technology, or clean up the environment. Geoengineering, that idea in super freakonomics, complete disaster. That's my summary statement on that. I can talk about that later if you guys want to know more. So here's an interesting statistic. You've got, say that you want to do a global regime of cap and trade on climate, right? Let's say that the average output per capita, let's say, we don't even care what it is, but let's say that it's, what we want is we want an average output per capita of 1,000 tons per year of CO2 equivalent, right? Methane gas is much more. Well, 1 ton of methane is worth like 20 or 30 tons of CO2, something like that. Big number. So we talk about CO2e equivalents, right? Let's just say it's 1,000 tons CO2 equivalent per capita. And that's where we want, worldwide. We've got 6.5 billion people. This is just for the sake of argument. I don't think 1,000 is right. Okay? So, if we're having that per capita output, and it's a global cap and trade, and the average American is using, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 4 times that number. Okay? And then let's say that the average, let's just say for the sake of example, the average Indian or Chinese is using 500 tons per year per capita. If you're going to do cap and trade, what does this imply? What?
If you're running the 500 and you kind of have an advantage.
If you have 500, you have an advantage?
Because you would be able to sell those credits.
Right. Okay, let's start with that, right? So, if everybody's supposed to use 1,000, then every human on the planet gets a permit for 1,000, right? If you're only using 500, you can sell it. If you're using 4,000, you have to buy it, right? And these, I would not be surprised if it's some kind of number. I mean, remember that the price, I just made up this number here, but let's just say that's true for a second. The price in Europe for right now is about 20 euros a ton for carbon. The US, they're throwing around prices, 10, 30, 40 bucks, whatever. Let's just say it's $20, right? Say the average American gets a permit for 1,000, has to go buy 3,000 tons of permits. That's a very messy 20. Right? That means the average American has to pay $60,000 to the folks elsewhere on the world. Now, that's a big number. Let's say it's even $5,000. Anybody? Volunteers? You want to pay $5,000? I mean, if you're actually from China and you're living in America, bad news, right? You're living the American lifestyle. You want to pay $5,000? No? Yeah? So are we going to do well with our climate change negotiations? Basically, it's like, fuck it. I don't care. It costs too much. I'd rather see the world die. That's it. That has been the U.S. negotiating position for the last 10 years. If you want to be depressed, this is a good topic, right? Because this is completely unavoidable truth as far as what has to happen. We don't get a free lunch. If it was free, we wouldn't have a climate change problem. We would live in a post-carbon society. We wouldn't be using coal. We'd have fusion power reactors in our pockets, you know. We just plug it into the car and the car would drive away. But we don't. We're not Buck Rogers in Star Trek, right? So the problem with climate change is money. That's it. We like our lifestyles, we don't want to pay for it. And everybody's going to Copenhagen to argue over who's going to pay for it. And no one wants to pay for it. It's the same thing as the stimulus. Let's just borrow from ourselves and stimulate ourselves. And then we'll all be rich again. It's the same thing as the water negotiation that I ranted about a couple weeks ago. Let's just take $11 billion that we don't have and pass a bunch of laws that aren't going to do anything and congratulate ourselves. Complete failure. Right? That's the debate that's been going on with climate change for a long time.
But couldn't it be that there are some, I mean, if this cap and trade scheme would sort of rely on laws that somehow you could control, everybody measures everybody's consumption, oh, red light, you went over 1,000, okay, somebody goes, I mean, you could also do it in the products, but what about people who have the intrinsic motivation to just use less? I mean, couldn't that be another strategy to try to get more people to be aware that they just use less by themselves?
Yeah, so in my blog I have a tag, I call it 2080, the 2080 rule, right? And I just made up this chart, right? So what I say in water is that 20% of people actually want to use less water, energy, save the earth, whatever. They take short showers, they contribute to Greenpeace and all that stuff. 80% of people don't care. It might be more like 95. But some people really do care. They usually live in Berkeley, right? If you go out into the Central Valley, or you go out, I mean, I saw some of the people that were being interviewed on a conservative television network about a conservative topic. And they were not Berkeley people, right? They were like, who are you to tell me what I can drive, or shoot, or eat, right? There's a big debate. The vegetarians are like up in arms saying, hey, what's up? We've been ahead of you guys for decades, centuries. And the meat eater's like, I like beef, right? So the 20% of the people really do care, and if the rest of the world was full of those 20% or 10%, then we wouldn't have this problem. Because it'd be Gandhi. Remember Gandhi? He said, we should all live in villages and make our own cloth and be a little community, and that's good enough for me. I'm happy. And the rest of India is like cell phones, rickshaws, you know, so all that stuff.
But at the same time, I mean, I think that if you take, for example, smoking, years ago, well, everybody smoked. If you told somebody we can't smoke in this train station, they're going to look at you and say, well, what do you mean? I'm going to smoke. Anyways. Right. So, I mean, societies are able to adapt and shift forward. So, couldn't it be possible that maybe through this whole debate in 20 years, might be too late for that, but in 20 years, more people will realize.
Yeah, so that's the second half of the 2080 rule. If you want 20% of people really care. 80% of people don't care. But if you charge them, they'll change. Right? You have to charge them. You have to make it illegal, which is a sense of a charge. Right? Now, I'll tell you, the big problem in climate change is, this is why I don't call it global warming. I call it local warming. Right? Because who really does care if Bangladesh goes underwater? It's only 150 million people. But if the ski season shuts down, whoa, that is a big problem. Right? If you want to convince people in the Bay Area that global warming is a problem, talk about the ski season. Don't talk about Bangladesh. Right? Make it local so they pay attention. Your children will die. My children. Oh, well, that's important. You see?
So, like, given the costs for, like, each individual person will have to pay for the cap and trade system, like, what if instead of having them pay for their carbon emissions, we let them do whatever they're doing right now, and then take, like, half of the money that would be required to do that, and then invest it, or subsidize solar energy, or subsidize, like, your nuclear fusion pocket generator thing. And it won't solve the problem now, but, like, in 20 years, if we invent our fusion generator pocket thing, then the problem would be gone.
Well, that's in a sense what I was talking about in terms of you buy your pollution.
Right, but what if,
and that money has to go somewhere.
Right, but what if that's more money? I mean, that's more money than we need. I mean, how much money would it be? Like, like the market price for, using your numbers, right? Like, there's only 500, there's whatever, 300 million people, let's just say, using the 4,000. Right. And then they have the rest of the world's 500 to buy, right? So the price for the permits is probably going to be relatively high, right? And there's going to have to be a lot of, trade going on. And you estimated like $6,000, right? So like 300 million times $6,000 is
A lot of money.
More money than would be probably needed.
$2 trillion.
Right. So, and I don't think that much money. I mean, if you ask,
So regardless of the amount of money, what would you do with it?
reinvest it into like science.
Yeah, but that's part of the debate.
Oh, well, I'm just saying that. I mean, that's an alternative solution.
But it's not necessarily a solution.
Well, right, it's a gamble. It's a risk.
Right.
I mean,
No, but
this is like, this
so
is
the idea is, where would the money go? Part of the money might go to buying permits from the Indians and the Chinese. The other part of the money might be going into technology, right? But notice who's bellied up. I mean, everybody's in D.C. going, yeah, we're going to save the world. Give us money, right? The auto industry, stimulate us. We'll make green cars. Did anybody see the Chrysler move? Chrysler was not only went bankrupt, then it got bought by a private company, then they got bailed out by the government, and number one on their list of things to do was green car. They got $10 billion or whatever, and then they canceled the green car program. Right? Remember sunk costs are sunk? They got the politicians to put the money on the table, then they got the money. Screw the politicians, they don't want to do that. It doesn't pass the BC test. Right? We want to sell SUVs. We make more money from SUVs than we do from electric cars. Those are worthless for car companies. So there's a lot of people out there saying, stimulate us, and we'll save the world with your money.
But like when we needed a cure for polio, like we gave a bunch of money to the scientists, and he didn't say, oh, thanks for the money, and like left. Like there are people who would take the money and actually put it forward to solving the problem.
Right.
And so I'm not suggesting we give all our money to car companies.
No.
But like there's plenty of scientists
Right.
who at this university, for example, who would work on making like real solutions to our problem for a lot less money than it would cost.
That's right. But the whole wall of money that's moving around on climate stuff right now, or the potential money, that's why the negotiations are very tight, right? Because there's so much money at stake. Forget healthcare. This is crazy money, right? Worldwide, trillions. So the political debate is essentially who's going to get that money, who's going to pay it, and who's going to get it, right? And you're talking about a piece of that action. I completely agree that that's important. The idea that innovation and competition and stuff like that can help us solve this problem is another thing. But I will tell you that my top line comment, we have to use less, is standing, no matter what the technology.
I think another, a good way to do what he was talking about, and I know they've done this partially with solar panels, is that they're really, really expensive to install, but if you can afford them, the government gives you incentives to do so.
Right.
And so the people that can afford them pay for them and get them and get the incentives, and then that money goes back into developing more cost-effective.
What, the idea of subsidizing a good technology.
Subsidizing until the technology.
Yeah, there's a slightly more clever way of doing that. So instead of taking a solar panel array, which might cost $15,000, and subsidizing it for $10,000, I mean, there's some really big subsidies being thrown at solar. One of the innovations is to actually put a loan on the house, right? It stays with the solar panels. So if you sell the house, then whoever's paying off, it's like it's a type of debt like a street improvement, right? This kind of debt. And then the house is worth more because it has solar on it, and the debt of paying for the solar gets paid over however many years, 30 years or whatever. So that's a different story. Yeah.
Doesn't Chicago have like a local cap and trade system?
There's a lot of cap and trade stuff being tried out. There's the regional, what's it stand for? Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, up in the northeast of the U.S. There's the Western Climate Change Initiative. It involves California, some Western states, and Canadian states. A lot of observers, states, are checking it out. So there's actually a carbon tax in the Bay Area. Do you guys know that? There's a carbon tax already. It's 4 pennies per ton. Not very big, right? But on the other hand, all you have to do is crank it up, and you could still collect all that money, right? They have the accounting system in place. Number one, they got it to go into place. Number two, they've got it working. And that is actually the biggest two problems, the big barriers to a carbon tax. And they just crank it up from 4 pennies to $4 or $40, and the Bay Area suddenly would have a carbon tax that was working and binding a constraint. Put another hand up. Yeah?
I was going to ask a question, but I don't know if it's off topic.
Everything's off topic.
There's a lot of debates about the cap and trade, how they're putting it on a carbon tax. Like the first cap and trade was with the sulfur, the acid rains, and that was easy to monitor
Right.
and easy to basically, it's easy to implement that system on sulfur because it was easy to monitor.
Right.
But they're saying carbon's, it's too wide and there's too many sources and there's too many outlets, and
Yeah.
so it's going to be too difficult to actually implement it.
Right, so is that your question?
Or I was just going to ask you if you think it's
Is that hard or is it efficient? So yeah, the question is essentially, can we monitor carbon sufficiently to do cap and trade, or tax it, for that matter? And the short answer is yes, we can do it. It's a lot more work than doing sulfur dioxide. The sulfur dioxide, the SO2 emissions were being monitored at 200 or 300 different sources, mostly power plants in the Northeast. And carbon emissions, every car that burns the gasoline, it's like, well, wait a second, but you can tax, because carbon doesn't get transformed even when you refine it. You can tax petroleum at the port of entry, right? Or whatever refuge you're pumping it out of, or shoreline. So you can tax carbon upstream. You don't want to tax it downstream. I mean, this is actually kind of a scare tactic by people. Oh, every time you turn around, you have to pay a carbon tax on a candy bar. It's like, you will, but the carbon tax is embedded in the cost of the candy bar. The same way that, much more so than sales tax, but the same way that gasoline that goes into the diesel that goes into the tractor that grows the corn for your Coca-Cola corn syrup is already embedded. So it would just pass through the system. That's not a problem. Right? Getting the political agreement on it is, yeah.
Who's paying the carbon tax now?
Who is paying it now? Well, we do. Consumers pay carbon taxes. The little 4-cent one in the Bay Area, yeah, we're paying it. Everywhere in the Bay Area. Yeah, but it's very small. So the Chevron refinery up in Richmond pays the most total. They pay $300,000 a year in taxes. That's like they spend that on paint, right, or on hats. So that's nothing for them. So it gets passed through. Did you notice as your lifestyle declined? But you have the carbon tax has to be big enough. You want price to be big enough to affect what you're doing, right? If people are like, if you buy a bottle and you pay a 5-cent deposit and then you throw it in the ocean and you kill a turtle, the 5-cent deposit hasn't done anything, right? The price has to be high enough to get your attention. That's the bad news. Everybody's sitting there going, we're going to have a cap and trade carbon tax and prices won't go up. Whoa, hold on. There is a complete failure of logic in that statement. The price of energy has to go up and you will use less. That is the goal. Anybody who says differently is like selling garbage. Bullshit.
With smoking and the ozone layer issue, it was a fear thing. People were really, really scared.
Smoking was secondary smoke problem. So people were afraid of getting cancer from smoking.
Yeah, and then with the ozone, they didn't want to get cancer. Skin cancer.
Yeah, the Australians especially.
Yeah, so do you think that the fix for public awareness would just be to scare the crap out of people? To tell them that they're going to like die of climate change and stuff?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, some people say that Al Gore is just out there scaring people and there's nothing really happening. Right? And Al Gore has lots of investments. I put up a blog post on this. You know, he's a multi-millionaire based on green investments. But on the other hand, he's a multi-millionaire because he put his money where his mouth was. And some people are like, well, he's moving the debate. He has political friends. They're making laws that favor his companies. Let's put that aside for a second. You know, to get political action, essentially, like after Katrina destroyed New Orleans, we have a whole bunch of political action on levees. And then everybody forgot about it and they went back to the next thing. Right? So politics moves from one fear to another. The war in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. We are going to die tomorrow. Right? He has bombs. They got that on tape. Right? Bush and Cheney and everybody saying, he's got bombs, it's going to happen tomorrow. You thought 9/11 was bad. That was like fiction. Right? But it was politically motivated. Okay, last hand, and I'm going to move along on climate change.
What about, a lot of people say the argument against taxes to increase the cost of energy would be that so many jobs would be lost because everything would get more expensive and people would then buy less and less would be produced.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that?
I think it's bullshit. Everybody who's sitting there going, we're going to make jobs or lose jobs, it's all bullshit. Period. So here's what happens. It's not jobs. What they care about is jobs at companies. And I have a coal mining company, and I'm doing I'm blowing the tops off of mountains in West Virginia, dumping all of it into the river, destroying the ecosystem and local community, but I've got jobs. If you tax coal, I'll lose jobs. No, you won't lose jobs. You'll lose your business. Those workers will go plant flowers or knit, or they'll work at a car company, or they'll do something else. It's not, all of that rhetoric about jobs is bullshit. It's all about giving money to the businesses, and especially the coal companies. Especially the coal companies that have the mountaintop mining right. Those rights are worth nothing if you can't mine them. The workers will move to another job. So what I say is, like, don't protect jobs, protect workers. Protect people. Right? All of that creating jobs is just like, I have lost track of the number of times I've seen bullshit behind that. It's like, protect the jobs of U.S. auto workers. Who gives a shit about U.S. auto worker jobs? Those people could work in a million different jobs, but those auto companies, that's what they're trying to protect. Their equity, their shares, their capital invested. Right? It's all, that's what's been happening over and over. Robert Reich, who was the labor secretary under Clinton, just like gave me that enlightenment. I was like, hell yeah, no corporate welfare. And he's like the most leftist economist in the UC, I guess, in Berkeley. And so, but he's absolutely right. And when someone says, oh, you need to protect jobs at GM, it's like, they don't give a shit about jobs. And the union guys, they're the same thing. It's like, protect union jobs. Because the union organizers, they would lose their jobs if all the union workers go off and work at schools and plant trees, because there's no tree planting union. Do you see that stupid thing? The Service Workers International, they were on strike somewhere. I mean, the whole protest thing at Wheeler Hall because they wanted to restore custodianship. But this Eagle Scout went and spent 200 hours clearing a path through the park. Because he wanted, Eagle Scouts, you got to get a merit badge and everything. He's like doing the good thing, right? You're a Boy Scout. He's clearing a path. He spends 200 hours. That's 5 weeks of nonstop, full-time work to clear a path. And the union is protesting that he's taking their jobs. Because they want a monopoly on clearing the leaves off of a path. So that you can be paid $40 or $20 an hour plus bennies. That's not jobs. That's like, it's protected stuff. And it's the same thing. I'll say, professors with tenure, they don't want to work either. That's why they have tenure, so they don't have to work. That's what tenure's all about, lifetime job security. That was a bit of a rant. Let me go back to. So we know the U.S.-China dynamic, right? The Chinese are like, hey, you got to pay us a lot of money. The U.S. is like, we don't want to pay money. The Chinese are like, we want to pollute. The U.S. is like, you can't pollute. So you can see where that's going. It's very tough. Climategate. Has anybody heard this expression recently? Last week? 1, 2. Climategate. Some hackers did a good job, I think. They exposed a bunch of emails and data from climate researchers and scientists to the world. My dad, who does not believe in climate change because he watches a certain network. He sent me an email. Is this true? So what happened is all of these data came out and it says, oh, that whole hockey stick, CO2, anybody seen that? This is time and this is CO2. That whole hockey stick, oh, it's actually like this. All these data are fabricated, whatever, right? And so-and-so wants to publish a paper in a journal saying that climate change isn't happening, but so-and-so, the other academic, says, don't publish it, I don't like him. Or I don't like his results. So these academics are essentially stabbing each other in the back, like usual. I have this on my blog this morning, so I'm kind of reading you something. But basically the whole Climategate is that they've exposed a bunch of backroom debates among climate scientists. A little bit of data, I don't know what's going on with the data, we will see, you guys should look it up if you want to. A little bit on the data. Do we actually see global warming in the data? It's a big... And I know that people that don't believe in climate change and do like their SUVs and do not want to pay $6,000 a year, how are they going to see this development about scientists maybe fabricating data? What are they going to say? Conspiracy. I told you so. It's Al Gore. He just wants to make money. Which is probably true, right? But... the thing is climate change a complete fabrication by a couple of scientists, that intergovernmental panel on climate change? It sounds like a communist conspiracy. Well, here's what I say. As a free market person, if any scientist could come out with evidence that climate change wasn't happening, that global warming wasn't happening, ExxonMobil, British Petroleum, and everybody else would give him the Nobel Prize of all time, right? Lifetime $1 billion a year income stream, if you could prove that. Why wouldn't they? right? A whole bunch of special interests we know are fighting tooth and nail against climate change. If there was incontrovertible evidence that climate change wasn't happening, they would be so happy. They would pay billions. They already have thousands of scientists working against, trying to find evidence that climate change is not happening. So some emails and all that stuff, it's just bullshit in terms of why it matters. It's typical and nice gossip, but I know they're going to say, "Oh, it's not happening." But that's. I think you should think about this whole incentives, right? Who has an incentive to show this up? Let me tell you a little bit more about the realities of negotiating over climate change. On campus here, they have the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute, and where I used to work when I was a secretary before I went to PhD land. And they had a workshop. Then I came back as a PhD, which is kind of impressive. Secretary PhD. I was first in line for the coffee, not last. I had privileges. So they did a workshop on games and climate change. And they had some of the top game theorists in the world. Oh, what kind of game is climate change? Is this a ludic game? Or is this, do we use ludic theory or conflict theory? What does ludic mean? Ludic means what? Rules. What does conflict mean?
No rules.
No rules. You bring your baseball bat or your gun or your dinosaur. Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? Is climate change a ludic game? It's conflict, right? There are no rules in climate change negotiations. So as part of at this MSRI thing, we had some of the top, this is like Princeton and Yale, all these like high-end schools, of course Berkeley. And they're all coming to work on mathematical models for solving climate change negotiations, etc. Right? They had all these game theory, and they had the first mover, second mover advantage, the Stackelberg leader. They had all that garbage going on. And they were going to fix it, and they had a model, as all economists do. And then I said, okay, guys, I'm going to do my session. And what I said is, okay, everybody in the room. And it was like almost the same number of people here. You guys are group A. B, C, and D, right? A is America. C is China. B is bureaucrats. And D is the other people. You gotta bring it down. Bring it to the people. You need to pause that thing for a second? Stuff like that. We needed data. Alright? And the other people were all the rest of the people on the planet. Clearly, this is a G2 type of negotiation. Is it good?
Yeah.
Alright, so what I said is, America and China, your job is to negotiate a climate change agreement. There are no rules. Go. And that's when the American, you guys are A, right? The America was like, okay, what we want to do is we will give you access to our technology. We want you to shut down the coal plants. We want free trade. We want access to your markets. And China's like, you have to pay us a lot of money, and we don't want to devalue our currency, and da 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 da. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. And if there's no rules and there's no time limit, and you have a bilateral monopoly, you guys remember that concept? A bilateral monopoly. They both have market power. Where does the equilibrium in a bilateral monopoly? Can you predict it ahead of time? Do you remember that? Is it yes or no? Who thinks you can predict equilibrium ahead of time in a bilateral monopoly? Hands up, yes. Hands up, you cannot. Hands up if you're asleep. Come on, guys. Who can predict the equilibrium in a bilateral monopoly? Yes or no? Raise your hand. Yes? Yes. Yes? There's two yeses. No? What are you saying? Yes? Well, I didn't see you. Yes? Let's try it again. Everybody put up both of your hands. Come on, guys. Damn. All of them up. Anna? Put your hands up. All right, good. All right. This is my girlfriend. All right, put your hands down. Who thinks yes, in a bilateral monopoly you can predict equilibrium? Yes. Up, 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 up. No. Okay, the no's are right. Thank God, the market. So they can't get an equilibrium, right? They can't get a negotiation. So after a while I said, look, B and D, they get to vote who they like better, right? They're going to have a democratic vote, and America, you make your proposal, and China, you make your proposal, and the world's best game theorists were in the room, and they knew exactly how to write that proposal. Who knows what they did? I'll take 3 suggestions. Game theorists, come on. I'll take 1 suggestion. Damn it, start with something. How do you convince the rest of the world to go with your idea?
Pay them.
Pay them. America went to the rest of the world and said, we'll pay you $10 trillion to accept what we want. And they're like, yep. That was it. Right? There's no analysis, there's no negotiation, there's no binding treaties, there's no bureaucracy, there's no monitoring, there's no cap, whatever the hell it was, just give us money, we don't care what you do with the planet. Right? That was the world's best in the room negotiating climate change. And in Copenhagen, I think it's going to be worse. I don't even think they're going to offer money. Right? There'll be nothing that happens. That was a little bit depressing, but it was much more realistic. Right?
Where was this?
Sorry?
Where did this happen?
This happened at MSRI on campus during the summer.
Do you think the political regime in China has anything to do with this, since they can't really hold the government accountable?
I think the political regime in China has been really interesting. The party, its number one job is to stay in power. And they're not being dumb about it. The party in Burma is being dumb about it. Right? The Russians were dumb about it, or the USSR. Right? The Chinese party is like, whoa, they're like going to management leadership conferences, figuring out how to stay one step ahead of people's demand for consumption and stuff like that. So they have a very strong incentive to stay in power. They have whatever it is, 15 or 50,000 protests per year that they actually log for some reason, right? So besides the minority problems, which are, as far as most of the party's concerned, small, the government is doing a reasonable good job of delivering the goods and kind of trying to surf the wave of freedom, right? As far as I'm concerned, China's going. The economic development is going to go first, and then political development will happen after. As soon as people start feeling as soon as they get their, that Maslow's pyramid, as soon as they get the basic needs taken care of, I got my food, I got my house, I got my car. Whoa, I want to talk now. Can I talk? That's when it'll happen. But anyway, the party's got big incentives. Okay. I'm going to go over the briefings right now. I'll get to these other things. But I want to give you guys some feedback on that, and then Faye and I are going to hand them back. The good news is the briefings were pretty good. I didn't read them all, of course. You guys were reading each other. And I'm going to go over 7 of them that I thought gave me good ideas that I want to promote, not steal, as somebody noted. Right? They will be promoted with your name. But first things first. Next week when you hand in the briefings, this is what you have. Don't do what some people did. Do not go on 2 pages. I saw there's one person went on 2 pages that got nailed by the graders. Congratulations, they should have. Put your own SID on the sheet. Don't put a random number. We had to look up SIDs on some people. They got points taken off because I don't need the extra word. And on the briefing, if you didn't put a summary on it, you got knocked down as far as we were concerned. Right? When you were doing the grading and you didn't put a summary at the top, you got lost a point. So do what we asked you to do if you want to have your points. So when you bring it in next week, it's going to be the same game. 3 copies. 3 times. And your name. That's the easy thing. You can do that, right? Okay, so bring that in. We're going to redistribute it at the end of class like we did last time. It's going to be a mess. I'm sorry. But it's it's really very good, right? You guys each had, you graded 3 people, you had 3 people grading you, you've got like lots of feedback, and hopefully it's helpful in terms of learning, right? And as I mentioned, learning and grades don't always go together. I know that's annoying, but the world is not fair. The 7 that I liked, for example, 7.3, 5.7, 8.0, 8.3, 9.0, 10, and a 7.3. Right? I didn't just choose 10s and said, oh, I like those. Right? But some of your peers would have graded different ways. And some of the peer grading sucked. And I am not going to question it. So the first thing is that if your peers gave you a silver or bronze or whatever, I'm not going to question that. That is not negotiable. Okay? It might not be fair, but neither is life. Okay? I don't think it was a huge disaster since everybody out the door got 5 points no matter what. And I'm sorry if you feel like it was unfair, but it was random. It wasn't someone choosing you to be unfair to you. So that's a note about grading. As far as I was concerned, the vast majority of what I read would have gotten less than 5 points. You're lucky I didn't grade you. The average would have been 4 or 3. Okay, as you know, the average was 7. Because the vast majority of you didn't answer the question. The question was, propose an economic or environmental program that will make everybody better off, and it may harm special interests, and you've got to get reelected as a politician. You're writing a briefing for a politician. There's so many people that had, the worst ones were people that read me back the question. A very nice one-page essay of my question. Well, we have to take special interests into account because we want to make everybody better off, and sometimes there's tricky things because you have to get reelected. I'm like, is there anything here? Some of those people actually got 10s by their peer graders. The second worst thing to do was to write down your favorite proposal. I really think that everybody should have a chicken in their backyard because it's a great idea. And that's why we should have a law about chickens in the backyard. Right? Disaster. Right? It's not a disaster. It doesn't get to the political problem. Right? If you're trying to implement this, is there a special interest group? Identify them. Right? What are they going to fight against? How do you counter that? How do you do some kind of judo on a special interest group? Another one, people sitting there saying, I think it's a great idea to have emissions testing on cars because of smog. That would be brilliant. If we implemented that in California, like we did in 1980, people were like reciting history as if that's a new program. I was like, good idea. It already happened, right? The exception to this, which I thought was entertaining and quite good, was some people, they said, this existing program sucks. We should end it, and they make people better off, right? That was allowed. You had to come up with something new, right? Don't tell me something that already works. We already know that. Let's all be nice to each other. Let's be green. It's good. Let's be happy. Those kinds of policies were not policies, right? I told you are not allowed to evolve society. Over 12 generations, my policy will make sense. No, that's not policy. Win, 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 win. My policy is a win, 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 win. It's like, if it's a win, 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 why didn't it already happen? Are you not doing careful analysis? Have you missed somebody? Because there's a loser somewhere. If it's so obvious, then it should have been done already. We just make a law about this, we have a regulation about that, and that'll fix that, and that'll be the end of that. We'll have a law that will all be nice to each other. Right? You have to think about conflict rules sometimes. Okay? You have to think, if we're going to have a seatbelt law, what if people don't put on their seatbelt? Well, we have a fine. Well, who's going to do the fine? Well, there's a cop. Well, what if the cop's even doing it? Well, You have to think it through, right? Sit there and think through all the ways of breaking your own idea. And some people, I know it's only a page, but you sit there and you think about it, and then you write down. You don't have to write down the whole thought process. You say, oh, and by the way, to get the donut eating cop out to give you the ticket, you give a cop, whatever, half the bounty for every unseatbelted person. Oh, but when the cop makes it up, and then he's trying to catch people who really have seatbelts on, well, then you have to have a camera on it. I mean, you can do that. It's okay. And you give a one-page summary. There was a lot of critical thinking going on, and obviously you guys are putting pen to paper. And by the way, in the next week when you're writing briefing 2, hopefully this kind of advice will be helpful. Right? You'll take that into account. And as you all know, you're going to be grading each other. It won't be me. Right? So when you're grading, also keep these things in mind. All we have to do is educate people. No. That is not the solution. Right? Education as a solution is not a solution. There's lots of educated people out there screwing up the world right now. Right? They have good at, in fact, economists are quite good at it. A PhD in screwing up the world. Look at the financial meltdown on Wall Street. Some of the smartest people on the planet have fucked over our financial system in order to take home their $10 million bonus at a cost of $100 million or $1 billion to a taxpayer. Right? Education is not a solution. Let's be good. I said that already. Subsidies are very tough. If you want, a lot of people are like, all we have to do is tax this or subsidize this or what. Where does that money come from? What's the opportunity cost? If we just subsidize solar panels, that'll fix it. Well, yeah, maybe. Right? But that money has to come from somewhere else. Well, you have a limited budget called your taxpayers' pockets. Let's subsidize a certain... There's some people who are like, all we have to do is give more money to the such and such a coal industry. I'm like, okay, yeah, you'll get that passed, but you just helped a special interest. Your job is not to help special interests. That's easy. Right? Your job is to help society, potentially at a cost of special interests. We'll just tell people and make a law and they'll change their behavior. There's plenty of people that, who doesn't speed? Who never has speeded against the speed limit? 25 zone, 35 zone, 45 zone. You ride a bike, right? No. 65. Okay, so 99% of people speed. It's against the law, and yet they break it. Do not just say we make a law that'll fix it. Right? Remember that enforcement matters. Don't make up numbers. Don't say there will be a vast benefit or huge savings or trillions. Someone put trillions in there? I mean, you can have trillions of something, but that was like off by several orders of magnitude. Okay? If you're doing a cost benefit and you assume $1 trillion of benefit, yes, that helps, right? But you can't just assume high numbers. All right, so let me tell you some of the ones that I liked, just briefly. I'm putting the 4 digits up so the people that are in the class could feel a little bit of praise, even if their grade did not reflect what they wanted. There was one person that talked about using feed-in tariffs, the idea that you would pay homeowners to push energy back in the grid, and that would encourage solar panels or whatever. That's an old idea. Good, but an old idea. Another one, expand the market. Let's have cap and trade inside of California. We can include Mexico and the developing world. That's another old idea. A good one, but an old idea. There was one that I liked, or I thought I liked. Yeah. Putting a carbon tax on and rebating against income tax, that was a good idea in the sense that it was, if you're looking for democratic and you're looking for votes, then helping a majority of people in terms of a tax rebate and soaking the rich is a good idea. It's difficult, as you know. I mean, Obama's promising to fix health care by taxing the rich, and we see where that's going. But it's a good idea to shift it to carbon. If you're going for a vote, not a bad idea. I really, one that stuck out was let's tax the polluter above average polluters and we'll rebate cash back to below average polluters. That change, it's the same idea, right? If you just have cap and trade, it's the same idea as cap and trade, which is that if you're using less than 500 tons, you're going to make money, right? But it's an explicit kind of guaranteed return on below average pollution. That was a good idea. 3025 is your last 4. And 2820 was the one who said, let's move carbon taxes. Let's outsource the selling of the program to scientists. I thought that was quite good. Take it out of political hands. This has been done a lot in terms of blue ribbon panels, but there's something to work with there that I'm going to look more into. Essentially putting the power with technocrats instead of congressional staffers. That was 3489. Branding, I thought, was quite good in terms of a consciousness-raising idea. 3706. So the government will call it, Singapore's recycled water, toilet water. You know what it's called? How they brand it? Anybody from Singapore? You can buy it in a bottle, right? Clarified toilet water. People drink it in Singapore. And they take it to water conferences. They're very popular. So branding, good idea. There was an open land initiative, 4487. Taxing, it was interesting because it was a time-shifting situation. You would tax local property owners in order to buy a piece of land that would increase the values of their properties. That's kind of shifting income. I tax you now, you get the benefit later. Very good address of special interest. The construction companies were also in there, and they would benefit because their property would be worth more money. Right? It was not exactly a win-win-win because there was a bit of time shifting going on, but it was a good idea. 6107, environmental direct democracy. This was also environmental justice. That was quite good. The idea that you would bring in the local community in terms of voting and empowerment and networking. The biggest problem in environmental programs is getting people to sit around in the church and talk about their environment and make a move. I thought that was a very good idea. And the last one is let voters decide water prices, 8300. That actually is, I never thought of it as a good idea. But because voters are always bitching about water prices going up, but if they actually vote on it and they decide where to set water prices, then that could end up working out in terms of another kind of soak the rich, or soak the soakers, I guess. So those are some good ideas and some feedback. I want to hand these back now, so let's do this.